So first of all, I would like to welcome you here to the third session of Track 3 and to say good afternoon and definitely welcome back. The name of the session, What You Need to Build as a Disease Community. And my name is Dina Heath, and I will be your room host for the next two breakouts in this track. And as a reminder, these sessions are live streamed, and we want to welcome our remote participants as well. Our first session is Shared Datasets, the Importance of Having Data and Making It Available to Share. It will be presented by Scott Sutherland over here, who has a great title. He's the Director, Knowledge, Design, and User Experience Data Sciences Platform, Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard, and he calls himself a data scientist. So, and sitting next to him is Jennifer Thornton, who is the Executive Director of the AT, is that how you pronounce that? AT Children's Project. So please join me in welcoming them both. Thank you for being here.
Well, first, I just wanted to say thank you for letting us speak today. We're going to actually try to keep this relatively short, but it's a real honor to be up here. This is my first Global Genes Conference, and my day job is as an engineer. I'm a data scientist, I'm an engineer, so I spend my time in meetings and behind my computer. It's really important for people like me or the folks that work in my department to meet people like you, because frankly, it's easy to think that the sum of the meetings during the week or the code that we're writing is the point to what we're doing. You know, is the end result is the point. But in reality, what we're trying to do is build tools that allow people like you to do what you're trying to do, which is to solve problems, to cure diseases, to build or to create new treatments for the patients that you love. And so, at any rate, thank you very much for adding a little dose of reality to my week this week and getting me out from behind my computer and giving me a chance to talk. We have about maybe 10 minutes apiece that we're going to just run through some slides. I'll talk a little bit, and we're essentially going to be talking about the project we've been working on for the last year together. It actually started with our two bosses at last year's Global Genes Summit. My boss came home and he said that, he came back to the office and he said, we've got a new project. We need to build a registry. And I think my first reaction was, why? It's not like there are that many other, it's not like there's a shortage of other registries out there. And so I wanted to know what was the need we were trying to serve. What would we do differently or better than the existing options, and why would we take the next year to do something like this? And then he talked about the meeting that he'd had with Brad Margus in the previous week. And it comes back down to a couple things that are really tied in with the title today. It's the importance of having good data, and also the importance of making it available to share. And particularly that last part, because I think, as we've heard a couple times already from comments in different sessions, your ability to share your data is only as good as your ability to control your data, your ability to own your data. And so this is really about putting the control back in the hands of the patients and their advocates in order to be able to do the most with the hard-won data that you're collecting. So I'm going to move quickly through the first couple slides because we've seen a couple of treatments of these already, but essentially what I wanted to start with was the opportunity, which is to create to increased ability to turn out new treatments and to serve the patients that we're trying to serve. But the challenge is that rare diseases are really tough to work with because the patients are scattered all over. There might only be 5 in the whole country. So any given hospital, any given doc isn't going to see very many of them. And it makes it challenging for drug companies and other companies that might be working on therapeutics to work with as well, because they don't know where the patients are. They can't do their normal thing, which is to hire 5 different hospitals to recruit patients and set up a standard study. And so I think this is why we're all interested in registries, is because it brings the data together, it characterizes the group of patients and makes it easier to find and more attractive target for folks like either academics or drug companies or even parents or citizen scientists that might want to work on some sort of a treatment. So we decided to work on a potential solution for some of these issues. And as you know, and again, this is something that's been talked about before, building a good registry means you can identify your patients. It means you can describe them in ways you can't if you don't have that data. It means you can facilitate running of clinical trials downstream. But there are things about the existing set of registries out there, or the existing options, that are still hard problems to solve, and they're not completely solved. One is just better linking of the data in the registry. That may be disease history, or it might be information out of medical record systems, linking that to the genomics data. And that's what the Broad Institute does. The Broad Institute works on big genomics projects. The other thing is that in so many cases, the data in the registry isn't really owned by the disease foundation that works so hard, or the patients that work so hard to collect it. It may be owned by the faculty member who's working at the institution, whose name is on the IRB submission. It may be owned by a company who's paying for the trial. It may be owned by the platform that you used to collect the data, but it's not owned by you. And so one of the challenges Brad gave us at the beginning of this project was that he wanted to completely own the data. He said, I like you guys, but I don't know what's going to happen downstream. And so if I want to pull my data out of your system in 2 years or 5 years, I want the ability to do that. I want the ability to lock you out. I want the ability to take my data and take it someplace else, or share my data with the people that I want to share it with without having to go to you and get your permission. Can we do that? And I had to admit that was a really interesting question, because we don't generally do that in academia. We set up the kinds of studies we've always set up, which is a faculty member at our institution or one of our related institutions is interested in something, and they do the work, they get the grants, they build the database, and it essentially belongs to them. And we had to really think about that. But the nice thing about being at the Broad Institute is we were created as a place for people to share and collaborate. So one of the things that's missing in our mission statement for the Broad is any mention of furthering the careers of our own faculty members. In fact, we have almost no faculty members. So what we do really well is help people work together and share, and we decided that we could do this. So we built a system that is essentially owned lock, stock, and barrel by the AT Children's Project. If they wanted, I hope you won't turn it off next week, but if they wanted to turn it off next week, they could. They could move it to another platform and stop working with us. But moreover, Jennifer's the PI on the project. I'm not the PI. Anthony's not the PI. And so, she works with the Data Access Committee. They decide who gets to access the data. It's really controlled from the beginning to the end by the patients and their advocates. So I'll move through this quickly. You know the way things used to work with the research consortia in between the patients and the scientists. The data is collected by the consortia or by the individual PIs, and then it's shared out usually by taxing people in the form of getting their name on the paper, if it's shared at all. And we decided to build something that went directly to patients. So working with Jennifer and their ability to contact their patients, the patients are registered directly into the registry. They're not registered through sites. They're not registered through clinics. They're registered directly, which means that the foundation has the direct relationship through the platform with these patients. The other thing this facilitates is the ability to recontact patients really easily. And this used to be a really hard problem. In the old days, in fact, the IRB often wouldn't let us recontact patients because it was seen as something that would bother them. But these days, we have such easy ways of contacting people by email and over social media that we decided to leverage that aspect of it and not require patients to sign some sort of blanket consent to let us do anything we wanted to with the data. They sign a very narrow consent that leaves the control in the hands of their advocates. And we rely on the fact that we've engaged them and we can go back to them to ask them for permission if we want to use their data in new and novel ways. The advantage of this is that research participants are data donors. They're really engaged. They're part of the process, and they feel their ownership, I think, through the Disease Foundation. As I said, it facilitates recontact of participants, so if we want to do something new that we didn't think about at the beginning, we can get permission from the IRB, and we can send that out. In fact, Brad and Jennifer wanted to be able to send out even really simple questions. He talks about a story where parents were talking at a conference and realized that both their kids had a certain symptom, an exaggerated startle reflex, and they wanted to push that question out to the entire community and ask how many people's kids had that same phenotype, that same issue, and it was a hard thing to do. But through a system like this, we want to be able to push out something as simple as one question and allow people to answer it. And it's scalable because many steps happen automatically, so it's all automated. Even things like shipping the spit kits for collecting saliva and being able to do the genetic sequencing is all automated through the system. So that means we can work with as small a scale as just a few patients with a disease foundation, and we could work with thousands of samples a month if we wanted to. In essence, what we've tried to build is a Just Add Water registry platform for rare disease foundations. And we mean that on the technology side so that it's something, and we're not there yet, it still takes us a few months to set one up right now, but we hope to be at the point where we could set something up for you or for any disease foundation in just a few weeks. But we also have done things like selecting a for-profit IRB, an IRB that's not tied to one institution, so that they're just as accessible to you as they are to us. We've templated things like the consent and the protocol so that you don't have to build it from scratch, because I don't know about you, but I don't feel like an expert in building protocols and consents, and I'm guessing most parents who are manning the helm of these disease foundations don't either, so we try to make it easy. So we're essentially tackling one problem after another and trying to find ways of making it really easy for foundations to set up their own registries. This is a longer description, and you can read it. I won't read it all to you, but the first couple bullet points are things that are essentially not that novel, right? Reusable internet portal just means it's got a website attached to it. The backend database is actually something that we licensed instead of building ourselves. We don't need to build a new system for showing forms on the web or for managing a research study. Those exist. So we licensed one from DatStat called DatStat Discovery, but we made it, we fairly lightly coupled it to the system so that we can pull that out if there's a better one, and we can plug in a new one. In fact, we'll be working with REDCap by the end of the year, and we could easily work with other disease registry applications if we wanted to. The last two items are things that are more novel. And the first one was integrating with our Broad Genomics systems. And so that is what I talked about earlier, where we can send out a spit kit very easily, but we can also track it in very easily, and then it flows into our systems, which I'll talk about in a moment. The data does, when it's generated, the sequence data flows into our systems for sharing with scientists. And lastly, we're working on a whole lot of different side projects, and because we're working with one platform, it means that any side project that works out, that pays dividends, we can add on to the overall system, and then every single registry can benefit from it. So we're working on projects like gathering data from sensors and wearables. We have 2 projects going in that area right now. We're working on a better way of ingesting and harmonizing phenotype data so we can really take those characteristics and match it up with the genomes more efficiently and with better success. We're looking at collecting and processing medical records data, and I don't have to tell you how hard a problem that is. That's one that we're working on in the Precision Medicine Initiative as well, and I expect it to take a long time, but we'll get incrementally better at it, hopefully very quickly. This is what it looks like from an architecture standpoint, and I don't know how interesting this is to the folks in the audience, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but essentially the blue portion at top is the web-facing component of this. We have a participant portal, a sample management portal, and a portal for the study staff, like Jennifer, who are managing the study. We tie it all together with our own secret sauce in the middle, which is the libraries that we use to tie everything together. That's where we've spent most of our time developing, and then on the bottom level is the things that we've licensed in order to be able to gather the data. And lastly, I want to come back to data sharing, because that's, after all, the topic of the day. If you're working with a registry and it's going to have a lot of genomic data in it, you have to ask yourself how you're going to share that data in the end. And it's one of those things that most people don't think about until they realize they don't have a solution for it. The average whole genome file is something like 200 gigabytes. And that's a big number. It probably doesn't mean any more to you than it did to me the first time I heard it, but let me put it in perspective. If you're streaming a Netflix movie, you're streaming between 1 and 3 gigabytes an hour. And if your house is like mine, if both my kids are online and streaming videos at once, they're probably not very happy with the results. So I've got about maybe 1.5 streams worth of data coming into the house. That means it would take me something between 40 and 70 hours to download one whole genome file. Now you multiply that by tens, or in the case of Jennifer's study, maybe 500 whole genomes, and you start to see the magnitude of the problem. We're reaching a point with genomic research where we just can't move the data around fast enough. You can't go out to Costco and buy a hard drive and slap it on there and ship it to somebody. It doesn't work. And you're going to get maybe, 3, 4, 5 of these on a laptop hard drive. So just downloading it into your local system isn't something that's an easy thing to do either. So we've spent the last year and a half with somewhere between 30 and 40 engineers building a system that allows us to share this data, that allows us to bring the researchers to the data rather than make them download the data into their local systems. This means a couple things. It means that we can accelerate the pace of research because people won't have to put together the resources that they need to download and to store this data. But it also opens it up to people like, well, to use another Brad example, he wants some precocious kid in India with a good idea to be able to use this data, to look at it and try out his idea. Why not? But you know what? That kid probably doesn't have a high width, ability to download huge amounts of data. He probably doesn't have a multi-terabyte or multi-petabyte data farm to work with. But if he has the ability to spend a little bit of money in, online, in an online environment, we've built out a platform where that person can actually spin up his own project or her own project, and they can do it right online, right where the data is without having to download anything. This repository, by the way, this data donation this genome analysis workbench is also the foundation for sharing data through the precision medicine initiative that we're working on. That will be the 1 million person cohort, huge amounts of data. And so the studies that are using this will also benefit from all the stuff that we're building for that. That's it for the technical side of this, and now I wanted to turn it over to Jennifer, who's going to talk to you about what it's been like building out her registry for the last year. And then we have lots of time for comments.
Well, hello. It is beyond great to be here. Let me show you 2 of the 500 reasons why we want to build out this registry. We have Andrew and we have Riley. They have something called ataxia telangiectasia, which is why we call it AT for short. It's a neurodegenerative disease, and it causes progressive loss of muscle control, immune system problems, and a very high rate of cancer. We are looking for a cure. The AT Children's Project raises about $2 million a year, and we spend it on research grants, a clinical center at Johns Hopkins, research workshops in our efforts. So Scott's told you a lot of the backstory about how and when this all started last year. But I'm going to back up a little bit and tell you about other registries that we had a look at. We would get on conference calls. I'm in my office in Florida. Our science coordinator, Cynthia, would be in Virginia. Brad would be God knows where. And we would talk with various registries, and he would start asking questions such as, well, who owns the data? Well, your institution's IRB has to be involved. How long does that take? Every time someone has a new question to ask, a new researcher, who needs to collaborate and decide whether or not this study is worthy of collaborating with in order to move on to the next step? And every time when we got these questions and we got close to picking a registry, we would find that we just didn't have the control that we wanted in order to be able to have data for years, encourage families to put it in, and that we would be able to have as open access as we wanted. And the philosophy behind it was, if families are willing to put in and share their child's data, and they want any researcher to be able to look at it no matter how crazy the idea, why does that take months and have to go through a filter of someone else to decide whether or not that could be done? So that's how this all started. That's the very big picture of it. So we decided on what our must-haves. We just took a step back and decided what is it that we wanted no matter what. And so what we decided is that it just absolutely had to be owned by the families. So we created the Global AT Family Data Platform. We wanted to create a separate entity, not the AT Children's Project. So the AT Children's Project is funding it initially. We're hoping some of the other organizations around the world will continue to help fund us as well. The Wobbly Feet Foundation is another organization that helps fund AT research, and they have helped us fund this project also. So this is a project that we started, but it's the Global AT Family Data Platform. We want families all over the world to feel ownership. Here's just a snapshot of the Family Oversight Board that we developed. You can see we asked families from advocacy organizations everywhere to take part. This way, we can make sure that the mission and everything that we're doing is in line with what works for AT families around the world. And it's the Family Oversight Board that hires the scientific and medical advisors. And from this board, they'll pull the Data Access Committee. So the families rule everything. Let's say you end up with the scientific advisors and a lot of them aren't giving enough access to some researchers. Well, that doesn't matter. The families can get rid of them and hire some new scientific advisors who have a more open access idea in mind. So the families rule the roost here. The next thing we had to do, of course, was to build it. So we contacted the Broad Institute and we contracted with them to help build the actual software platform. Here's a snapshot of our actual homepage. You can go to atfamilies.org and see it yourself. Don't go ahead and sign up as a patient to take a look at it. I will delete you. So just don't even try it.
We can let you look at the other version of it that's not the real thing if you want to look.
Yes, yeah, of course. And as Scott said, I'm the principal investigator on this initiative. The reason being, I don't work for any one institution that would have certain rules like having to go to that institution's IRB to get future things approved. This is an initiative, we're gathering data. Down the road, we hope to be able to ask additional questions. That'll have to be run by the IRB. We wanted this to be as smooth a process as possible and not have to go through any one institution. So luckily, not being a doctor myself, I was unqualified enough to quickly become the principal investigator. My background is social work. I'm a social worker, graduated from USC. Any Trojans in the room? Woohoo! All right. Graduated from USC with my master's, 1 year of clinical and 1 year of nonprofit management, and I've been working with the AT Children's Project for 17 years. I know almost all of the families and have helped recruit for many clinical studies over the years, so it was actually a really good fit. And Jiwon in our office and I got human subject research trained online, which was a great process. And so we had all of our training, and we're super careful in the office of what we do and don't discuss around anyone else, which is nothing. So we're very, very careful about that. So people go in, they give permission. We have several different layers of consent. I can go into that in greater detail at another time. But I will tell you that it really was something else to build this. And I'm going to fast forward through months of pain and agony and fun and excitement and all different kinds of things mixed into one. But the one thing we did many times was to test. We tested and tested and tested. And one of the great things that we did as part of this testing was an actual live screen share with a parent going on to register herself and her children. And it was pretty exciting. We had a user experience expert from the Broad Institute. We had their web designer who was in Argentina, and the UserX guy was in Cambridge. We had the study staff in Florida, and we had a parent in Pennsylvania, all watching the parent get registered for the first time. And we'd watch her cursor go here and go there, and we get to this one section that we had been kind of stuck on. We're like, we're certain a parent would do X, right, and not Y. Cursor goes to X, and then slowly drifts up and makes a beeline for Y, and you could just hear everyone silently screaming, no! And back to the drawing board. But it was, and then so they just made some tweaks, and it worked out fine after that. So it was absolutely thrilling to get it tested and everything working well. So we're planning to add additional components. This is a French translation we just had done. We'll have some kind of drop down for the different languages. We've also had a Spanish translation just done. We plan to add a legacy section to include the data from deceased patients. That's an extremely important component for us. And we are expanding to Canada and to the UK imminently within the next couple of weeks, which we're excited about. And then internationally, we're going country by country. Again, this is something you can catch me later to discuss if you'd like. I can go on and on about it. I will spare you. So everything was built. Then it came time to recruit. Here's our gorgeous invitation. I brought copies for everyone if you want. I can show you later what it is we sent out to all the families. We also sent an email on the same day that went out, and you click send. We sent it out to hundreds of families, and we waited, we waited, We waited, and we waited, and then there it was, the first email that said, you have a new participant. And it was actually minutes, not days, so that was great. It was probably about 40 minutes before that first email arrived from someone we hadn't prepared in advance. They knew nothing about it. They just cold got the email, got in, and we were like, this is going to work. And overnight, I think there were about 8 signups. This is just a couple months ago, so I'm still reeling from it all. And we currently have 100 who are signed up, which is very exciting. It's great. So we've sent out 2 emails, 1 mailing with a second one on the way. We've mentioned it on Facebook. And we are just getting into our part of things where we're studying what the best method of follow-up is. Is it going to be personal phone calls? Is it going to be just repeated mailings? We had a lot of people tell us over the last couple weeks, end of summer vacations, buying school supplies, getting kids back to school. That has really kind of stopped things up. And everyone's been saying, oh yeah, I've been meaning to. Yeah, we're going to get on it. Or wives turning to husbands saying, you didn't do it yet? I gave you the email. And caused a little friction about that, sorry. But so we're getting there. So I'm going to be learning a lot in the next month or 2 about the best possible method for follow-up, which I'd be happy to share with you also. That's a copy of the email that went out. So our subject line, join us to help transform our understanding of AT. I know I was speaking earlier with someone who had questions about how do you get families on board. That was really important for us to know that they personally not just could, but had to if this was going to work. They had to participate. So, other elements of our project. We wanted to think big. What kind of data elements could be the most important for us to add? So we decided to add a genome study component, and I'll tell you why. In England, a few years ago, there was a 42-year-old woman, married, children, driving, just living her life, and she had some weakness in one arm. And she went to the doctor, and they did lots of different things to try and figure out what it was and couldn't figure it out. And in the end, it turned out that they found out that she has AT. Not a mild form of AT where she makes a little bit of the AT protein. She had no AT protein and her cells were classic AT. So something was compensating for the lack of AT. There's something else in her genome that's compensating. So if we could get the data from families and find out who's walking longer, who's in wheelchairs earlier, who develops cancer, who has more severe immune system problems, if you could do that, against the backdrop of the entire genome, maybe, just maybe, the secret is in there somewhere. So for us to do this registry, a very important component to try and look for modifier genes was the whole genome sequencing. This is a separate part of the study. In other words, you don't have to participate in this to be in the registry. That was also a very key important thing to us. This is just one more element that's available. You can see that there's the saliva sample kit that goes out to families. I took a tour of the sequencing facility at the Broad Institute to learn more about it. I'll tell you what, the guy was great who gave me my tour, but a lot of it went over my head. I asked a few questions, but when we left, Brad was like, how much of that did you understand? You were nodding. I was like, I didn't want to be rude, but you can't keep asking that many questions. So these machines are incredible. It takes about a day and a half, I believe, to sequence a whole genome. Pretty amazing when you think the first one took 10 years, I think it was, right? And $3 billion, something along those lines. Here's a little slide they showed me that contained 8 samples on it, so 8 whole genome samples are run on these slides. We currently have 24 samples that have just been sequenced, the very first 24. And this week, they are taking a look at the data to make sure that it looks good before we go ahead and continue on sequencing. So, very exciting news for us. We plan to add more data elements in the future. You've heard a lot of people talking about this today, from wearables, videos, scans, evaluation results, microbiome information, and then that middle slide, you can just see about those SNAP questions. We're very interested in that. we made sure that the consent form included the fact that in the future we were going to go back and ask people more questions. So it was a little bit of a tricky consent form to write because you couldn't really ask what those questions were now. So it's kind of like, do you mind if we come back to you and ask you questions in the future? You can always change your mind later. And then the same thing with the IRB. We had to tell them that we promised to go back to them and run any new questions by them in the future. So we've learned a couple interesting things so far. Just a very initial look at the first 100, we know, for example, that 75% of the kids do have fatigue. Not a surprise there, we knew that. The average age of diagnosis is 2.01 years, so we knew it was around 2 years old, so now, we're learning things like that already. But we're really excited to see what the future can bring and have great, great hope for treatments to come out of this. Thank you.
So fortunately, we both left a little bit of time for your questions, and we'd love to hear what you'd like to talk about. Yeah.
We met earlier, and I had no
Yes.
idea how important you were going to be in my life. Just a quick question. How did you fund the genome portion of the registry?
How did we fund it? So it was a special initiative from our board of directors. That's how it started. They went out a couple years ago and they contacted all their people and said, we have a super important initiative coming up and we need you to be a part of it. And it did start with that. And so we're looking at probably most money up front in the next couple years to hopefully get everyone now into the initiative. And then we anticipate that it'll be however many in a given year. So we do think that we'll be able to cover the costs as it goes on.
So the foundation is funding that.
We are funding it at first, yes.
And did you also fund the platform development?
We worked with the Broad Institute very carefully on the funding of we didn't actually fund the development, no.
We were lucky enough to be able to fund the development out of some research funding we had. Frankly, we needed to build the platform anyway, and these guys were wonderful about being our guinea pigs to work with us the first time. So we found the money for the initial development.
And how quickly is that platform going to be available to other organizations?
We're actually getting ready to roll out our second study in November. So it took us about 6 months, 8 months to build Jennifer's. The follow-on study, which is a rare cancer, it's angiosarcoma, is going to be launching in, I think, around mid-November, and that took us about 3 or 4 months. We have a couple studies after that that'll be launching at the beginning of the year. And so with each iteration, we get faster and it gets cheaper. We have to cover the cost for rolling out the new platforms now, but we're hoping within a year to be at the point where we can roll out with about a month or so of elapsed time, assuming people have things like the surveys already ready. It takes longer than that if you need to put together your questionnaire from scratch. But I would say that a couple weeks worth of work and maybe a month elapsed time is our target. We hope we can get there within a year or so.
It definitely took us a lot of staff time.
And what is going to be the cost associated with that for an organization?
I think we're still working on that. I don't have the microphone.
Oh, here, come on up.
So I know the cost is a really important aspect, and that's something we're working really hard on right now. We do have to cover there's no markup. We have to cover the engineers' salaries, and so right now all we're charging, and it depends on how much we're doing for our foundation, how much customization we're doing. So we're just literally charging what it costs to pay the salaries of the programmers for that period. So if you want more details, we'd have to talk about the kind of study you'd like to do, but I'd be happy to have that conversation. Is there another microphone in the room? One for the audience? No? Okay.
Hi, my name is Steve Grossman with ADCY5.org. One, how did you steal one of my notebooks with all that stuff? That's
Sorry, what was that?
anyway, one of the things, next joke, no. One of the things that we've done is we've piloted the retrieval of retrospective medical records. how do you handle that and pulling in those data of the scanned files and all that information that can be pretty disparate and in different formats?
It's definitely an element that we want to add, but we do have concerns about exactly how that's going to work.
Yep. And we're actually adding that for our, there's a study that was really the precursor of this that we helped design but we didn't build, and that was another Broad study that is a metastatic breast cancer study. And for that one, we are gathering medical records data. And I have to tell you that the state of the art right now in medical records data isn't that much different than it was when I started this 20 years ago. It's essentially still, hand abstraction from medical records. I would say we're maybe one step better. I would call it computer-aided abstraction at the moment, but that's about as good as it gets. What we're looking at, we have a couple different projects in the works, including the large precision medicine initiative, which will be trying to tackle this problem. And there are a bunch of way smarter people than me working on trying to apply natural language processing and other things, including OCR. Or optical character recognition to get this data in. But I think we're some years away from seeing a true end-to-end solution. Hopefully we'll get incrementally better as we move along.
If I could just add, follow up to that. So it's Peter Goodham from Global Alliance. So we got 4 different working groups that are focused on this interface between electronic health record and genomic records to make sure that the way we see it in research at the Broad is the way they'd see it across the street at DFCI or Children's. Lots of work needed in that, and there'll be all kinds of garbage from the past, but at least moving forward, we're trying to make sure the genomic data can talk to each other.
And we could probably have a whole session just on this, maybe a whole conference just on this. I would say that the solutions are going to have to be varied. There are policy elements to this. There are wrangling the patients and the disease community to request their records so that there is a real need for hospitals to deal with this issue. And then, of course, we have to work with the hospitals to make, maybe even to develop record systems that are made for taking care of patients instead of billing patients. But barring that, it'd be nice just to be able to get the data out of them that's in them.
I know you mentioned that the cost for future developments is going to be based on the salaries of the engineers. I, being an engineer, I understand that's very expensive. Is there an opportunity to make the platform available as open source so that other individuals and other organizations with less opportunities for, I guess, funding have the ability to outsource it to lower cost centers and tailor, I guess, a vanilla platform to something that will be customized for their organization?
Yeah, I think that's very likely. Almost everything that Broad does ultimately ends up being open source. So we're not at that point yet. Frankly, it's still a bit of a skunkworks project, but we'll get there. The other thing that we'd have to deal with is the data collection part, because that's a licensed product. We spend a fair amount of money every year for the DATStat product. The REDCap will be free for use for nonprofit use. So that's one of the reasons we're going to experiment with that. But as you know, there's trade-offs. So we do think we'll be releasing it open source, but that's not on the immediate roadmap. First, we need some more time to add features and clean up the code base.
Hello, my name is Patrick, and I have comments and maybe suggestions. And maybe before I forget, you have a typo in your French translation. Sorry. But I can help.
I may take you up on that.
Yeah. So my comment is that if I understood well, at Broad, you had built a new data silo, I should say an additional one, with a very transparent, I like it very much, very transparent way of keeping the ownership of the data to the patient side and having this transparent sharing way. My suggestion is that we are at a Uber time. I rather prefer to see, and this is what my startup company called Portable Genomics we are developing and building today. I rather prefer see the patients to be their own data silo. I want to crowdsource the databases. I don't want a single database. Because think about this. When the patients start to collect their data, their medical, their genomics, their lifestyle, behavior, wearables, Internet of Medical Things, all this data onto their mobile device, their personal cloud, not a company, not an academic silo. their own silo at home, their own. Then you can start as a patient to use your data daily. You can build dashboards, you can monitor your health status, and then you can enable patients to share with who they decide. They can share with academics, and they even can share with industry. Let's talk about business, because there is business in this data sharing space. I think that you have seen this morning, data is a lot of value to the pharma. Your data is very valuable. So there is no reason why to share data with the pharma for free. Your data, especially your genomics data, you have read the press. It's being sold by 23andMe to Genentech, $20,000. So what I'm suggesting as well, as soon as a patient is its own data silo, let's enable the monetization of data from the patients to the pharma directly. We'll be reducing the cost here. You can believe me. And then let's share this money with the patients who share their data. I think this whole data sharing space, it's Uber time now. And then there is no reason why to share money with the pharma and the patients. Sorry.
I'd say philosophically we're very well aligned. In fact, you basically described what we're trying to build. We're not there yet. We'll get there. I don't think we built a data silo. In fact, it's one of the reasons why we purposely didn't rebuild something like DAT-Stat Discovery or REDCap. There are certainly other registry databases out there as well that we could wire into. What we built was a layer that allows us to pull data, to connect data from various other data sources. So we're essentially building the components that allow us to knit other silos together. I think it's a really important distinction. As for patients owning their data, I couldn't agree with you more. Whether we can get pharma companies to pay for access to that data, I think is an open question. It would be very interesting to explore that and see whether we get, ultimately we want to get cures, right? So whether we get cures or treatments more rapidly by doing that or by selling it, I don't know. Currently it costs about $20, $25 a year to store a genome in the cloud. So we'd have to figure out how the average patient would pay for that and whether they could recoup the kind of money for use of their genome from a drug company to cover that cost. Again, another question I don't have an answer for. So I think what we are 100% agreed on is that patients should own their data. I think, I own my data in Facebook, I own my data in Google, I own my data everywhere else in my life. I don't own my personal medical records, and I don't own the other data that's generated from my life. I think everything else is going the other direction. And so we need to, this is one of the really important aspects of this project, is to put the data ownership and control of the data back in the hands of the patients and their advocates.
Other questions?
Have you thought forward as patients now probably coming forward, and in some cases they might just have not done a whole genome, but maybe an exome or even just a gene panel around some certain diseases, and as you start to tease out the meaningful genes, have you thought about a way that people can enter this ecosystem, if you will, that they maybe have less information, but they start a limited participation, and maybe a future path would be to get a whole genome sequence when the costs make it less prohibitive?
Yes, in fact, I can't talk about the details of the project yet because it hasn't been announced, but we have another project, cancer-related project, that'll test the idea of allowing patients to donate data that's been sequenced already, and then integrating that with the rest of the data in the system. We're probably a year out from having real results from that, but I think that's very doable.
Sorry, go ahead. Wait.
Great.
Which is a huge deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So is this something, because I know you're sequencing yourself, that's the data that clears that path and we don't have to do it. Would we send that data to your system?
That's exactly what we hope, yep, is that we can make it really easy. In fact, I think it ought to be easy for you to donate all sorts of data. It's wonderful that Duke is allowing you to donate your genomic data, because that's
a year and a half
expensive to
it took me.
produce.
But now I don't know where to send it.
Well, you know what? Talk to me afterwards. I would have to find out if there's a reasonable data set to put it into, so that it'd have a home and it could be found and used. But definitely catch me afterwards, and I'll, if nothing else, I'll make sure and keep you in the loop on the kind of data, the data sharing efforts we're making. And as soon as we've got a place to put your data, we'd love to do it.
Hi, my name is Gina Zanuck, and I was here last year talking about Run My DNA. We haven't launched yet, but I would love to talk to you because everything that you're talking about, taking the silos down, we've built it. We just don't have funding for the engineers and programmers. So it's ready to go. We're looking any engineers that are interested. I have slides I can show it, but it is where it will be exactly what we're talking about. And I have my whole genome data, I have my exome data, had it analyzed, and it was about breaking all these silos down and having everybody share their phenotypes. So if you're interested at it, runmydna.com, you can pre-register and check it out. But if you want to talk to me more about it, I would love to talk to you about
Great,
it.
let's talk.
Thanks.
Yeah.
More questions?
I'm involved with the rare cancer, and I know there's a lot of patient registries out there, a lot. And so like things like Orion, where they harness a lot of institutions under their umbrella, and the researchers are using research or data from their own institutions, but yet they share. It just seems to me like a very spread out patient registry that's scattered all over the place and fractured data, and you don't know if the data that's being collected is consistent data, you know, if what the researcher can use. I'm just confused as to how you're going to harness all of this, or how this can be harnessed for one tiny subset of sarcoma, for instance, in order to have it usable for researchers, because they're going to their own institutions, and they are collaborating at times with other sarcoma centers, but they say that it is hard to get data from the hospitals. It's confusing.
And that's one of the reasons why we started this registry, to gather data on AT patients first and foremost. So right now, obviously, there's AT data that exists with different doctors, and hopefully one day we'll be able to bring that in. But it's a lot to get them harmonized immediately right now. So doing it this way, we were able to get this very small population's information up and running, hopefully a lot faster than it would take to harmonize data that exists in many different institutions.
It can be possible. I mean, you know, one of the great organizations that's working to try to help us do this is GA4GH. And so we're not there yet. There's an awful lot of work to do, but I think increasingly scientists are starting to collaborate on these standards, which will make it easier to move data around and make sure that you're seeing what you think you're seeing. Unfortunately, I think you're describing the state of not just registries, but research data in general probably across the world, but certainly in the United States. Researchers tend to do just what they need to do to get their experiment done. One of the things I love about working at the Broad Institute is that they encourage us to take that extra step and make whether it's our software or our data or our standards public. That means that other people don't have to reinvent it. It doesn't always mean we have the standard, but at least it means that other people don't have to wonder if somebody else has solved this problem.
And the researchers are accessing your data and their own.
Yep. Yeah, in fact, our system is made so that, for instance, in our genome analysis workbench, we have 3.4 petabytes of data from the Cancer Genome Atlas alone. We're one of 3 sites in the United States that's allowed to store that online in the cloud. So that's data that's all ready to go and harmonized and ready to be used by researchers. But we also allow researchers to upload their own data and share it with other people right in the system. Yes?
Hold on.
I just wondered what the foundation you said that's helping you do that, GH, can you say that again?
GA4GH.
Tell them what that is.
Oh,
Not everyone knows
well,
it.
I think you could do a better job of describing it than I can.
Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, all the computer scientists from GA4GA. So Global Alliance for Genomics and Health is the long phrase. But there is a really... You heard a couple of comments this morning about Matchmaker Exchange, and that's specifically for rare disease, matching genotype, phenotype, or gene candidates. But there's another discovery tool called the Beacon, And the Broad has lit what we call it, lighting a beacon. And that lifts their data up. So the very simple query, do you have this variant at this position on this chromosome in your database? The Broad is now one of 25 institutions that's lit over 60 data sets. And that query piece is completely publicly available. So we've probably got several hundred thousands of individuals in that piece. It's not specific to rare disease, but the more in-depth one is Matchmaker Exchange, and the Broad has also just or established a Matchmaker Exchange site. So in both cases, that institution, which is where the Global Alliance started, is kind of living up to the idea of make the data public.
So we've exceeded our time, and there are people mulling around outside, and if we'll take a few minutes and just give thanks to our great speakers and all the good information they shared.